Hey everybody, Tim Harrison, Straight Up Mortgage Talk. Today we're going to talk to an appraiser, Cheryl Funez. She's been doing appraisals for 20 years. We're going to figure out what do they do to determine value, how is an appraisal put together, and just the specifics about what an appraiser does. So let's get started. Cheryl Funez, appraiser extraordinaire. Hey Cheryl, thanks for being on the call today. Really appreciate you being on. Lots of questions for appraisers, so let's get into it. So my first question is, how long have you been appraising real estate?
I started appraising in 1985, before we were even licensed. And then in 1991, we became licensed, still doing it. And
Okay, let's see if we can fix it
darn
then.
it, how about if I keep this mic out? How does it feel? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, as long as you can hear us.
Yeah, let's do that. This one here is what's bothering me, this one on this side.
I wonder
The
why.
other
That's
one's,
weird.
this one's fine.
Okay, yeah, so as long as you can hear me.
Okay, now this is way
Most
better
people
now.
would rather hear me mono than stereo anyway, so that's
Yeah,
probably better.
okay, that's
Okay,
perfect.
all right, let's start over. Ready? Is that good?
Yes, better.
Okay, perfect. 3, 2, 1. Hey, Cheryl, thanks for being on. Everybody's been asking for sort of an interview with appraisers and what they do. And so super excited. So let's get started. So how long have you been appraising?
Started appraising in 1985 before appraisers were even licensed. I worked at a savings and loan at that time. Then when we became licensed, I became manager and moved on up doing different things with appraising, but I've been in it since 1985.
Fun ride, right?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I really do.
Not all appraisers liked when after 2008, 9, 10, where we started having these management companies and stuff, but I'm glad
Yes.
you're still doing it because having the experience of appraisers been doing a long time is super important. So what kind of licensing, and you just mentioned like originally they weren't even licensed, it wasn't required, but then it's the guidelines for who can be an appraiser have become stricter and stricter and more I don't know how to say it, but they're just a lot harder now. Like it's not easy to be an appraiser anymore or get the qualifications. So what are the qualifications now? I think you said your granddaughter's actually mentoring under you. And so you know this stuff pretty well, what it's going to take.
Right. She went and got her hours, 150 hours, and then she got her trainee license. Now she has to work under somebody for a whole year and get 1,500 hours. So, and then after that, they have to go back and get 50 more hours to become a certified appraiser. Plus, she has to have her bachelor's degree too, which she
So
does.
bachelor's degree,
Bachelor,
150 hours of actually classes and stuff.
yes, 150.
Besides the bachelor's degree, right?
Right, plus another 50 at the end, so it'll be a 200 total
And
hours.
1,500 hours in field work with somebody like you mentoring them.
Right, and that has
Right.
to be a whole year, exactly.
Right.
Yes.
So they can get paid a little piece of yours if they're helping you produce more, or they got to
Yes.
find somebody who's nice enough, or their grandmother that's
Yes.
nice enough to show them the ropes, right?
Right, right. And she's ridden with me since she was very young. So she's
Oh,
always
awesome.
kind of been interested in it. Yeah.
Oh, that's so awesome. All right. So next question. So a lot of people don't kind of understand. There's a couple different ways to determine value. The most common way that at least in the residential 1 to 4, what we're talking about, is kind of a certain way. So how does an appraiser go out there and determine value of a property? Like what's kind of the process they go through?
I think first of all, every appraisal is unique. It's a different city, different location, different amenities. And so you have to just kind of start from the very beginning. What I do is I get the appraisal and I call the people and I ask them some questions to see maybe how many bedrooms, bathrooms they have, and just kind of go down that. And then I start pulling my comparables after that. Oh, I also ask about any kind of upgrading, like if they upgraded their kitchen or their bathrooms, any floorings. Do they have solar? That's a big thing right now is solar. A lot of people have paid for solars, which they're not always easy to find something to compare with. But I kind of start there and then I start pulling comparables. Like sometimes you try to stay within a mile, a half a mile, but maybe the neighborhood changes on the other side of the main street. Like we would take like an upland, you have foothill and that. And so you might want to stay in the north side or the south side, depending on where the comparable is. And so then I just start from there, start finding. So I don't really say always a half a mile or a mile. I go by where it's actually located. And then I start pulling comparables. Like I pull, first of all, I'm trying to stay within the last 90 days for recent comps because the way the market's changed. So I, go back and pull the 90 days of comps and my little area. And then I just kind of make sure that I'm bracketing everything. I'm making sure that I have similar lot size, similar age, similar quality, similar bedrooms and baths, similar gross living area. All that stuff's very important when you're pulling comparables.
All right, awesome. So I always like to say it because sometimes, especially realtors or clients will ask me, and so basically what you're saying, and I'm going to use this because it's kind of a statement that people say, like, is the property north or south of the railroad tracks?
Right.
Like, is it kind of like, this isn't sort of this nicer area. And even though that might be within a mile of the comp that you could use, you probably want to find something again that's the most like your comp. If your property is north of the railroad tracks, if it's in a certain neighborhood, and we all know when it comes to real estate, it's location, location, and location. So the closer to the house, the most like that type of house. So for example, you appraise a lot of properties for me in the Claremont Village, and north of Foothill is completely different than south of Foothill. So that's one of those areas where you would go, well, north of Foothill actually isn't worth as much as south of Foothill because it's the Claremont Village area. We have historical homes, and maybe one is a craftsman and one is a tutor. And so you're going to try to find the properties that are most like that property. Mainly you start kind of with the square footage, right? So you guys are going to look like you're not going to use a 1,000 square foot against a 5,000 square foot. You're going to try to find a property that is not only in location, but in square footage and even in property type. And that's your best comparable. The problem, like you said, is a lot of times that doesn't occur. Like you don't just get to go and go, look, that's a model, that's a model, that's a model. And great, they've closed within the last 90 days. That's where you have to make what's called adjustments. So explain to me, for example, how an appraiser is allowed to make adjustments for like a newer kitchen versus an older kitchen, a newer bathroom versus a older bathroom, the remodeled, the up-to-date, the pool versus no pool. Because what people, when they see that appraisal, they see these grids and it's very confusing.
Yeah.
And you as the appraiser are taking your expert opinion that you have to prove based on what you've seen different properties sell for based on those kinds of things existing, meaning this property had a pool or a new kitchen and this one didn't. Explain kind of how you make that adjustment. Because when I first started reading appraisals, it always confused me because it almost seemed like opposite. You're making adjustments to the comparable to make it like the property you're appraising. Can you explain that a little bit?
Okay, what I do is when I look at the appraisal and I look at where the gross living area is, and above that, that would be like your bedrooms, baths, your condition, your lot size, your location, the time of sale. That's how I look at those are probably our dominant features of why they're going to buy that property. It's going to start there. It's probably more important than a pool or a spa. So I look at everything from the gross living area and above, and I try to find comparables. And then what I do is I make adjustments. So let's say that I have I'll just make it easy, two model matches, and they're exactly the same, but one has a pool and one doesn't have a pool. And the difference that's sold is $10,000. So that would be my adjustment for what the pool is. Now, let's say I go into an area and I've finished all my adjustments and it's a higher priced home. It's like $1 million home. That pool is going to tell me in the market what it's worth. Like, is it worth 10, 20, 30? What is it worth? And so each appraisal, you have to do that with. You have to find something like it. And that's how you start with your adjustments.
Right. So like, for example, some people goes, oh, well, it might be a difference of, well, the 3-bedroom or a 4-bedroom should, get more than a 3-bedroom. Not necessarily
No,
unless it's
no,
proven in the market, right?
exactly,
Sometimes it's just like, hey,
exactly.
that house had a better floor plan and that you don't, maybe you see a difference between a 2-bedroom and a 3-bedroom, but maybe
Yeah,
not so much in a 3 to 4. And so
correct.
people just assume extra bedrooms. Well, not necessarily. Depends on what people have recently determined is worth more or less to them in the market. And that's where I think it's very challenging for people to understand is that, yeah, there's a comp over there. And yes, it's a similar square footage, but maybe it's a completely different condition. I live in
Right.
an area that's homes were built in 1963. My house has been totally gutted and redone and
Mhm.
new kitchen and pool and all that kind of stuff. But there's other people in my neighborhood that haven't done anything. Like
Right.
that's still what it was. And so that same almost floor plan could be $150,000 difference because of those
Mhm.
adjustments. New kitchen, new bathrooms,
Yeah, yeah,
pool, no pool. And that's what the appraiser goes through those grids and does a
right.
comparison. First, it's square footage and location, right? The big
Hmm.
things you think about.
Yeah,
Then you get into those adjustments and to make those adjustments, you have to prove to some reasonable degree
mhm.
that actually is based on market data in the market. Meaning, like you said, on the $1 million property, those pools are probably bigger and fancier and all that kind of stuff. So
Mhm.
maybe they're $40,000, $50,000 pools new, and maybe get a
Right.
$30,000 adjustment versus a normal little neighborhood that does a $10 to $20,000 pool. Maybe that's a $10,000 adjustment because they're
Yeah.
probably different pools in $1 million home
Hmm.
than in a $500,000 home. Although aren't they
Exactly.
all $1 million anymore where we're talking right now? Holy
Yeah, I
crap.
think I think so.
Even though we have to start talking a million versus 2 million now,
Two
right?
million. Yeah, that's the way we're
Jeez.
going. That's true.
Oh
True.
my God. So in the purchase market, you have a contract. And so right now, and we're recording this in sort of the end of 2021, and we've been through 2020 where I thought, I'm the idiot that thought, oh my God, prices are going to drop, everything's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then COVID comes along and everybody wants to buy a house and needs more space to get away from their kids, and the market goes insane. And we're like,
Mm.
oh, well, mark that one wrong. But then again, it hasn't happened for 100 years. So what the hell? How would I have any data to know better? Now I know better. So you get a contract, prices are getting pushed up pretty hard. How do you determine the value of that house when you get people who have offered on a property? You've had multiple offers, and now you've got comparables that might be behind the times. How can you adjust for what? Because remember, market value of something is based on supply and demand. What is
Mhm.
somebody willing to pay for that product? Your
Right.
job is to support that value
Hmm.
that the buyers were willing to pay for the property. And again, a lot of times we've got multiple offers and they're pushing these values up.
Right.
How do you go about that when your comparables are kind of like older?
Well, what I do is I don't have a limit for how many comparables I'm going to use. Like on something like that, I'm probably going to have to use more comparables than I would normally. I would use 4 comparables and 2 closings. But
Mhm.
for something like that, I'm going to really research. I'm going to spend a lot more time. I'm going to go all over trying to find the most recent. So what I do is I find the most recent, that I look at your listings, your pendings, any of that. I've even had to recently put some pendings on that I can't verify doc numbers on, but maybe I'll have 2 pendings that are showing the agent has put that they've closed for a certain amount of money. So I actually am putting them down on the appraisal with the other comparables. If I have to take a time adjustment, that would support the time adjustment because they are the most recent. And
Makes sense.
it's hard looking at listings because the listings aren't the same as if they're actually pending and and have sold, because you don't know what they're really going to sell for. They may be listed low and then they sell a lot higher. So it does take a lot more time to do to
It
do them.
used to be we had the problem that the people would list them too high, and then there
Right,
was a 5% adjustment by the time it hit the
correct.
market that you'd see that was listed for 500, and you'd have to say, well, list price to sales price is usually 5% lower, so we'll take that
Right.
5% off. And you really can't give a ton of weight to pendings or
Mhm.
even listed as compared to closed sales, right? the closed sales is sort of the real thing. The others are to support upward moving
Right.
market or downward moving market.
Right.
Now it's kind of changed over like how long we've been doing this, that we actually have things now where, well, it's listed this price, but it's going to get overbid. And now properties are selling over list price sometimes.
Right.
So it's really hard to gauge, but that's,
Mm-hmm.
again, for that future, you're using pendings and active listings to get an idea of the way the market's going,
Exactly.
up
That's
or
what you
down,
have.
right?
Right. And like a lot of the pendings will be closed, but they're not, you can't find the documentation on it. So
Right.
what you do is you look on the MLS and you see that it's closed for a certain amount of money on such and such a day. So you don't want to not use those because those are real recent. It's just that you
Yeah.
can't verify the doc number.
Right. And when she says doc number, she's talking about when a
Oh, yeah.
county records it they record the closing and they say this is what it sold for and everything. Sometimes there's a delay in when that data
Mhm.
comes available to anybody,
Correct.
the appraisers included. So how does it differ when you're evaluating, doing an appraisal on a property that is a refinance versus a purchase? How does that, is there a difference on how that valuation's done? And if
No,
so, what are the major?
it should be done to me the same way. I
Okay.
take each appraisal as its own and, do the same amount of comparables or whatever I need to do to come up with a good value. So I would say if it's a refi, I'm going to find out the condition, just like I would on a purchase. I'm going to find out any amenities that they've added, but I wouldn't say I'm going to do anything different on a refi than I would for a purchase.
Okay. That's, everybody goes, well, I know my house would sell for, a
Right.
million and a half, but probably only appraised at 1.2. And I'm like, well, the
Yeah.
comparables are the same. Maybe
Right.
you get the upper level if the market's moving north and because of a multiple offer situation or something, it pushes that price a little bit north to the top end of the
Mm-hmm.
valuation level. But mostly the comps are the same. They've sold in the last
Right.
30 to 6, they've sold in the last 3 to 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
They're the most like type properties. They're, like you said, the same comparables. So,
Yes.
and it's true, sometimes properties sell higher in an upward moving market like this, but that's also made by sort of time adjustments, right? Where
Right.
the market's moving up 5% from the time that other one closed. This is kind of a dumb question because it's a supply and demand, but what we've really seen over this last couple of years is the lack of supply. So how does that affect the values on real estate?
Well, it's definitely increased a lot, and that's why you have to find the most recent things you can find. You have to ask a lot of questions. When I read every CRMLS, to use for a comparable, I really look at every picture. I read exactly what they say, so it's very important that everything on there is what I need to find. Like is a kitchen redone? Is a bathroom redone? Does it have some type of a view or what is it back to? I mean, we look at all that. We even go on Google and you can look up the property too, just to see what it surrounds. But I would say it's definitely had a big impact. And that's why you have to use the most recent stuff you can find.
Yeah, it's so funny because which means when there's less supply, you have less comps to look
Right,
at, and you got to
right.
do even more work because these property values, because there's less supply,
Yes,
values are getting shot up, but you also don't have as many comps to look at to
correct.
sort of look at. I love though the fact that I can have like not MLS, I don't have the access to all the special tools you do, but I can Google it and I can look at some website and look at pictures of
Yeah,
properties, and somebody will tell me, goes, oh, that my property, is so much better than this property, and then that should get way higher value. And say, okay, well, let me look at the comps that the appraiser used, because I know you guys are experts and all this, so I'll Google the address and I'll look at the pictures of when it sold. I know which websites still show the pictures, and I could go, well, like you don't have a new kitchen, and this one over here is like kick butt awesome. This one has a pool. This one has this. Just saying, I get where they're making adjustments, and I can actually see those pictures, or I
mhm,
can say, hey, look, you're right. Like your house does have some of these adjustments. That's one of the reasons why, at Cornerstone Home Lending, we have our own appraiser panel that we know and trust because they spend the time to do the extra work.
Right.
What a lot of people don't know is that appraisers kind of got screwed back in the last time values dropped a lot in 2008, 9, 10. Instead of blaming it on loose money, they blame it on appraisers. It wasn't the appraiser's fault that the values are there because money was so loose that it pushed prices up, but they got the blame. And so they created these management companies that have to look over what they do as professionals. And so they created these companies that will actually take a percentage of their fee just to look over their shoulder. We don't do that at Cornerstone Home Lending. We have an internal one that does that, and we make sure we have trusted, very experienced processors like Cheryl on our panel to protect ourselves, because we have to rep and warranty, it's called, take the risk for that. The appraisers that we're using are good and know what's going on with the value. But we make sure we pay you the full boat so that you can spend the time that's necessary to really get us an accurate value and such. So that's a lot different than a lot of other companies. All right. So let me see. We already talked about making adjustments and different conditions and all that kind of stuff. So I can skip that question. I'm trying to read my questions, make sure I didn't miss anything. This is a stupid one, and I think we talked about it a little bit. But how does location impact value? So we talked about north of the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
One of the things, and we talked about like when a property has different features that you have to prove in the market. And so I'm going to take an extreme. Okay. Somebody has a condo or a house and it overlooks the ocean, and the other one is on the other side and has no ocean view. They're still within a fairly similar location, but that ocean view is going to bring a ton more money. You actually have to go get comparables that have views and not views and show the difference and say, well, it looks like views are worth 150,000 in this market. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does make sense. And, sometimes there won't be anything, recent that has that type of location. So then you might have to go with something that's a little bit older. And what I've done sometimes is gone back even like a year and tried to find something that has the view and something that sold the same time that didn't have the view, the ocean view, and come up with what an adjustment was even then. So it's kind of like a puzzle, and you just have to find something and put it together because it's worth something.
Well, of course. And then but you can't just go, well, I know it's worth like 150 because I've been appraising this for 20 years. You can't do that. Maybe in the past you could get away with that a little bit more, right? When you weren't but now they're like, show us the data that proves that view is worth this. And like you said, you might have to go way back 6 months, a year, 2 years, and you can say, look, every year the differential between view and non-view is fairly close to between 100 and 200,000, depending on the view. This view is panoramic. It's going to be on the high side of that. And here's why in value. So you have to actually prove your case. Like you said, put the puzzle together so that if anybody's looking at the appraisal, and then you put a narrative in there explaining that. So it's not just the numbers, you explain all this in your report. How many pages is an average appraisal report after pictures and all that?
Oh gosh, probably probably 36 or so. It's a lot.
Oh, that's so funny. I was just going to say 36. I must look at a lot of appraisals. I'm like, how do I know that? But it must be. That's so funny.
That's a lot of papers.
I really like people understand that you really have to be a technician as an appraiser. I kind of put you guys as like, you're kind of in the same sort of mindset as appraisers and engineers and people like that, because it is a very technical job. And I don't think people realize exactly how technical it is. We have a lot of, customers and realtors and us on our homes. It's a real emotional deal, but you guys have to break it down into nitty gritty, numbers, prove it kind of thing. All right. So one of the questions I think that you said when I asked you, is there something that should be added? You said, you should ask me, like, what kind of sources do I have available to me to help me do my job? What kind of stuff? I mean, you have access to the MLS, which is the, real estate things of that. What other services does an appraiser have to pay for and have access to get all the data you need to do your job?
Well, pretty much with the MLS, you can go onto Realist, which is public records, which is pretty good, and that's included in your monthly fee to MLS. Then say you have new construction, then you may have to call title companies. So you have to use a lot of title companies. That's not always easy to do because you don't really have a title rep that I'm working with right now. I used to years ago. So we use a title company. We also use our files, like things we've done before. Like, say you had some big house you appraised and you maybe want to look it over and pull the comps from that one and look and see what you did, or look at your adjustments, just kind of, your files. But basically that's what it is this CRMLS, which you want to make sure that it's pretty says what the property is. So you know that the kitchen's been redone, the bathroom's been redone, the flooring, because that's very important. And then another thing is we I went blank, sorry. Yeah, anyway, so that's it, I guess. It's just all those things. Oh, another thing is we might ask questions. Like we might call an agent and ask them a few questions, to see, hey, was that solar paid for? Was it leased? So we do a lot of stuff like that, and most agents are very helpful with that.
Right. Because they know it's important to answer your questions for the future when they need an appraisal to come in based on what their client sold it for, based on those things. And just a real quick question, because you mentioned that solar before, and I wanted people to really understand. So when you lease solar, that's really not part of the property. And even though it might be attached to the property, you don't really own it. You're leasing the equipment. So it gives you no value on that property. An appraiser can't add value. But if you own that, because now, like, for example, I did a bunch of solar, and now instead of paying $200-300 a month in electrical, I'm not paying anything. And I own it outright. When I went to sell my house, it would be worth something because I actually own it, and it's not a separate payment anymore that somebody can go take off if I stop paying them, they could take off the property, because a lease says they own the property. If you don't pay them, they can take it, meaning solar, right? And so that's when she's talking about, is it leased? Is it owned?
Yes.
We won't let the appraisers give it value if in fact it's not sort of really part of the real property. Same thing, which is always interesting. People always go, well, wait a minute, on a hot tub that is above ground sitting there and could be taken, even though it's kind of attached and the electrical's there and all that, you can't give it value. But if it's in ground, because they can't just scoop it up and move it, you can give it value, because the in ground has value, but the other one's not really part of the property. It could be moved. So there's all sorts of things that you could spend days talking to people, but I think we cover the majority of what an appraiser does. And just kind of give you an idea, you just so everybody kind of knows, you call the client, you go see the property, you drive by the other comparables, you look at the pictures through the MLS, what those other properties look like, to be able to get as close as you possibly can. Then you make all those adjustments, and then you come up with a determination of value after doing all those things. So it's a lot of work for one appraisal. So when people complain that they've got to pay anywhere from $450 to $1,000, depending on the size of the property, I want them to understand, one, you have to pay for a lot of resources and how to be able to do that. You have to go look at all these houses and the time of driving all those other houses, not just the one you go visit and go walk through and measure the house to make sure it's actually the square footage that matched public records and all that. Have they done extra work, for example? All those kinds of things. So that's why I want to have this conversation, is that appraisers do a crap load of work to give us that report. And when you really read through it, you'll see how much work they do to determine that value. So thank you for what you do for us. I am not technical enough to do it. So
you're welcome.
Real quick, I know there's also another time, besides when I say I'm doing a purchase and I need an appraisal, and a refi, I need an appraisal. There's also times where financial planners or accountants need what's called a time of death appraisal. So that for tax reasons, you have to establish what a property was worth at a certain time that when the person died, because from that point on, there could be tax ramifications. So not only would Cheryl work with the realtors and us, but also people who might watch this that need a time of death appraisal. So how would they get a hold of you? What's the best way to get a hold of you if they needed your services or had questions for an appraiser?
This way would be my email, which is cappraiser@msn.com. So it's cappraiser@msn.com.
Awesome. Cheryl, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. I so appreciate it. And I appreciate all the fine work you do for Cornerstone Home Lending. So
Thank you.
the company
Appreciate
I
it.
work for. So thank you so much.